Back in the early 2010s, Microsoft was promising mobile users a chance to buy into their Windows Phone 8 operating system to truly feel the Microsoft experience on a mobile phone. A few of us were silly enough to buy into this promise and jumped in fully on the Microsoft handheld. But naturally, developers were not interested in making apps for this new OS, preferring much more to allocate their resources towards the iOS and Android phones. So, in a bid to make sure that they make as much money as they could on their software, after bringing in a small chunk of people into their new and modern ecosystem, they took all of the Office apps that they promised would remain exclusive to their mobile OS and threw them on the phones of Android and Apple. This is not really the same thing because Xbox is a much bigger chunk of the industry than the Windows Phone ever was, but as a former owner of the Nokia Lumia 920 followed by the Nokia Lumia 1020, I find myself once again feeling like Microsoft kind of tricked me again. I of course am referring to the announcement of Gears of War Reloaded coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC in August. I bought the Xbox Series X a few years ago after skipping the Xbox One, primarily because my PC was not strong enough to play some of the Xbox games that I wanted to play, and I figured at the very least I'd get to experience all the Halo stuff and the Gears stuff. I'm pretty confident that all of the rumors throughout the years are going to be true, and eventually even Halo will be on the Sony platform. And considering how bad of a launch Halo Infinite was, and the fact that I was already able to play Halo Master Chief Collection on my laptop, I'm starting to wonder if I would have been better off getting a PlayStation 5. And I mean, I guess Game Pass and the past 5 years kind of made the Series X worth it for me anyway, but I can't help but feel like that Microsoft is willingly moving towards the idea of just having its software everywhere that it can, making the Xbox consoles feel kind of pointless. Which I suppose is a whole separate discussion that might not really be relevant to today's video. Because today, I'm talking about double dipping. I'm talking about these games that you play and you beat, and then they just keep coming back like they're a cockroach. Your ports, your remasters, even sometimes your remakes, and the newfound cousin of those types of games, the upgrade pack. Back in the early days of gaming, remaking a game used to be exactly that. You were making a game again, from the ground up, usually. Super Mario All-Stars is the obvious one that many people point towards, but a few months ago when I was covering the Mega Man series, the Wily Wars also came up in that retrospective series. The idea was that they were taking a game and they were effectively modernizing it. Throughout the next few decades, you'd see this happen over and again, and the amount of detail put into the actual recreation of said title would vary from feeling like it's a completely different experience altogether, to, wow, this probably should have stayed nestled in my memory. Over time, as the development of games became less nuanced and more streamlined, people started to differentiate between the types of resellings these games were. You have your simple port, that's when they take a game and they just bring it onto a different console, pretty much looking and playing the exact same way. You have a remaster, that's when the game is more or less built on the same engine, but they make it look a little bit prettier and potentially add some quality of life improvements to make it more modern. And then you have your remake, and that's usually when they take the game and rebuild it entirely in a completely new engine. Now, if you set the remake to the side, the ports and the remaster not only being much easier to pull off now than in years prior, but also don't require too much of an effort to show the difference between console generations, specifically in the last few console generations, have caused a bit of a surge in the re-releases of these games, and their runaway successes have made them a staple of the industry. Whether you're talking about the quick turnaround and releases of the Last of Us games, dropping a Spider-Man bundle with Miles Morales with nothing added except for ray tracing, I think, and most recently announced Gears of War Reloaded, which is a remaster of Gears of War. But Gears of War was already remastered and is already available on the Xbox Series X. So you have Gears of War remastered, called Reloaded, coming to PlayStation 5. In fairness to them, they're only charging $40 for this, which, if you're keeping tabs of the way variable pricing works, means they put very little effort into this one. You're basically looking at the inclusion of everything that was in Gears of War Ultimate Edition, including all of the downloadable content. Now, the problem is, most of the time, these games aren't so generous. And generally speaking, the biggest culprit is Nintendo. Specifically during the life of the Nintendo Switch, where something like maybe 5 out of the top 20 best-selling games on that console were ports or remasters, and that's including the best-selling game that was on the Switch. I mean, gosh, off the top of my head, you have Zelda, Hyrule Warriors, Skyward Sword, 3D World, Mario Kart, Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Luigi's Mansion, Metroid, Pikmin, Xenoblade Chronicles, a pair of Donkey Kong games, and the list goes on. And it's not always first party either. Now, the big justification for many on the Switch 2 was specifically the fact that you would get to play some of these games in handheld on the go wherever you are. That was worth the double dip for many. And in the case of the third parties, that was worse the demake for many of these games. But from a first party perspective, that was Nintendo's chance to resell all of the games they already sold on the Wii U. Now, obviously, the Wii U was a failure, or by Nintendo standards anyway. So they put in all of this time and effort into these titles, and they wanted them to get a new life and actually reach the masses. The gripe that I had with this was that the games that were being played were not being treated as simple ports or remasters by Nintendo. They were being treated as fully fledged first-party games, which means they were taking up time slots and release windows of flagship titles. The common argument early on in the Nintendo Switch's life was that these actually were not being treated as primary Switch titles, but if you look at the actual release windows, it speaks otherwise. Most people consider that Super Mario Odyssey was the only 3D Mario title released on the Nintendo Switch, a singular 3D Mario game that spanned over the 8-year console generation. But as far as Nintendo's concerned, they had 3D World and the few-hour adventure of Bowser's Fury. And that's not even including 3D All-Stars, which they also released as a flagship event. In addition to that, while Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were both great games as far as I'm concerned, Breath of the Wild was initially designed as a Wii U title, and Tears of the Kingdom basically did Breath of the Wild again, but expanded on it. Which means you had the base of a Wii U game take over an entire Switch generation. Mario Kart famously did not get a true new game on the Switch. We waited almost the entire generation for a 2D Mario, not only because of Super Mario Bros. U, but also because Super Mario Maker 2 was not officially called a port, even though it was basically Mario Maker 1 with a little bit more. And again, you had all of these Wii and 3DS ports like Captain Toad, Luigi's Mansion 2, and the pair of Donkey Kong games that took very little resources on Nintendo's end, but were seen as eventful fillers in the calendar for Switch releases. Nintendo effectively found a way to use the Wii U budget to profit on the Switch games. To consider the amount of money that they made on some of these titles, you shouldn't just look at the amount of sales that they got on the Switch, which in many cases are massive, but you should also consider how little upfront cost they put into these titles, how little the effort was to get these titles in your hands, and just how much more profitable Nintendo was by reselling an old generation's games. They found a cheat code. It's not news to anybody, but many of these games not only got resold, they got sold at full price. They got sold, in a lot of instances, more expensive than they were on the previous generation. And it was not uncommon for Nintendo to go back and make it so that you could not buy that cheaper version anymore. Not off of their digital store anyway. So even if somebody was to say, oh, this game came out, I could get it cheaper on the Wii U and still be part of the hype around the release of it, well, you were usually out of luck and couldn't go back and play it. Unless you found a used copy, of course. Now with these games leading to mountains of revenue for Nintendo, naturally, they want to find a way to continue on in the success. The problem here is that the Switch 2 is backwards compatible, and while very few people purchased the Wii U, a whole load of the gaming populace got themselves a Nintendo Switch. So outside of a few titles, it might not be necessarily worth it for people to buy into a game again on the Nintendo Switch 2 if they already had it on the Nintendo Switch 1. And Nintendo, being the calculated company that they are, may not view the potential risk as worthy of the profits of re-releasing these games or remastering these games for the Switch 2. But Nintendo is the company of innovation. They are the company of brilliance. The company of weaponized nostalgia. And with that experience, they've found a way to create a false image of a constant console's life cycle without putting in even the minimal amount of upfront effort that they had to put in to port over the games from the Wii U. And obviously, I'm talking about the inclusion of the upgrade packs. Now, in theory, as a customer, the upgrade packs should sound appealing. You get to play these games that capped off at 1080p in 4K. You get a little bit of extra DLC in order to play a Switch 2 version of a new title. And as far as Nintendo's concerned, they don't have to put in any of the costs that would come through if they were making a Nintendo Switch 2 port for these Switch 1 games, so they don't need to make as much to break even. And then this way, either they have new buyers come in and make more money off of them for the full Switch 2 edition experience, or they find a way to make $10 to $20 off of the original buyers. So it seems like a win-win. But the problem lies in the fact that these upgrade packs are not being viewed as upgrade packs or DLC or little bonus content for the title. They're being marketed front and center. They took up sizable time slots in the Switch 2 Directs. And they're filling up lists in order to give you this false sense that Nintendo has a lot of games available for their new console, when in actuality, it doesn't. Because like I said earlier, Nintendo treats these ports and now these upgrade packs as if they are part of the main event. The launch lineup for the Nintendo Switch 2 includes Mario Kart World, that's a new game. Welcome Tour, I wouldn't necessarily consider it a game, but it is new and it is available at launch. Beyond that, you have the Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, 3 GameCube games that are part of the Nintendo GameCube Classics, and that's it as far as first-party titles are concerned. You're basically just getting Mario Kart World. That's the one launch title they are releasing with a console that's coming out 8 years after the previous one. So they've had a lot of time. Now, mind you, even if you want to open up that floor to the third parties, there's nothing coming that is going to be unique to the Switch 2. Some of it is even going to be on the Switch 1, and pretty much all of it is going to be on other consoles as well, which just continues on with the idea that the Switch 2 will just be a port machine for these outdated games. But let's steer back to the first parties. Outside of World, the only other game that has a confirmed release date that is actually brand new is Donkey Kong Bonanza. It'll be releasing a little bit over a month after the launch of the Nintendo Switch. Now, I'm of the opinion that this game would be ready by launch for the Nintendo Switch. And for all intents and purposes, they should be able to release it on the launch of the Nintendo Switch. But they think that they don't need to, because on paper, they have 3 first-party titles being released at launch. Those being the 2 Legend of Zelda titles, as well as Mario Kart World. And I guess Welcome Tour if you count that one. So now Nintendo can be like, we have 3 games that are going to be released on day 1, and then to show you that we have a string of games coming out, in a month from now, Donkey Kong Bonanza will be available. But if it wasn't for the simple Nintendo Switch 2 edition stuff, Donkey Kong Bonanza, or any other title, would have to be lined up alongside Mario Kart World so that their release doesn't look so threadbare. And this will continue along as you move through the Switch 2's life cycle. You may think that July has nothing but Donkey Kong Bonanza, but if you ask Nintendo, it has Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, plus Jamboree TV coming out a week later. And guess what? There's nothing confirmed for August, except Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, plus Star-Crossed World. And in between the releases of Kirby Air Riders and Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, you're going to have the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Now, Prime 4 is a little bit of a asterisk by it because it's going to be a dual launch with the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. So I think depending on how cynical the person you ask is, it's going to determine whether or not they view the game as a Switch 1 or a Switch 2 title. But I imagine that in between all of this, we will be hearing more and more about Switch 2 edition games coming out in addition to the first-party games that are coming for the Switch. And there's every reason to believe that the Switch 2 editions are going to outnumber the actual new first-party games. Because if you don't include Welcome Tour and even Drag and Drive, they kind of already do. And even if you do include those, it's still pretty close. So this is concerning because it feels like at minimum we're going to expect at least one Switch 2 edition game for every one new first-party title. And Nintendo is planning on putting a lot of emphasis on these Switch 2 edition games, as shown in their initial Switch 2 Direct. So as far as they're concerned, they found a way to keep their releases flowing, giving off the appearance of an ongoing library of new releases, and making extra money on all of these games without really adding that much to those games, allowing them to do effectively exactly what they did with the WiiU ports on the Switch, making a lot of money on minimal effort and giving the false appearance of a ton of new games for the Nintendo Switch, making it more appealing for the masses. But it's probably not going to stop there. There are more Wii U games that they haven't ported over. Heck, they even tapped into the Wii and the GameCube markets. And there's little reason to believe they won't continue to move forward with that. I mean, sure, the Wii sold well, not nearly as bad as the Wii U did, but we're so far removed from the release of the Wii that bringing those games back to the new console is such minimal effort for them, but it would be appealing for many fans on the console. So now you're going to be getting all of these ports, all of these remasters, a few remakes sprinkled in between, but I highly doubt it because that would take too much effort. And in addition to all of that, you have the upgrade packs. And it's just going to be a constant flow of old games being released on this brand new console, probably not even going to be fully optimized for the 4K, maybe the 60 FPS, because I'm guessing they're also going to be bringing them onto the Switch 1, so they're going to have to consider the lowest common denominator, which is its own little headache. And in the same way that we just spent a whole generation of Switch games complaining that they were charging us $60 for games that were over a decade old and actually much cheaper back when they were new, I think we're going to get all of that again. And in addition to that, you're going to see so many people talking about the endless chain of the upgrade packs and how that's all Nintendo is focusing on, and how we can't believe they justified a $20 price tag for nothing. And if they end up doing dual releases for some of these things, that being on the Switch 1 and on the Switch 2, and the Switch 1 games are $60, that means that the Switch 2 edition games are going to be sold at $80, because they've shown us that they account for that. That if you're buying a Switch 2 edition game, it's the Switch 1 game plus the upgrade pack, which is going to be their way of forcing us to buy these ports for $80. Let me give you a very realistic scenario. Realistically speaking, a new Zelda game is not going to be coming anytime soon. Probably a couple of years until we get at least an announcement, which means it's not out of the realms of possibility that at some point in the next couple of years, they decide to bring over The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess HD, which is obviously a Wii title that was remastered for the Wii U. Now, let's say in a couple years from now, the Switch 2 sold moderately well, even potentially at a similar pace as the Switch 1. They'll have a user base of Switch 1 players at over 100 million, as well as a Switch 2 user base of roughly 25 million. Maybe even 35 or 40 million, we'll say. So if they want to do a re-release of this Zelda title, they're probably going to want to put it on the Switch 1 in addition to the Switch 2. In the Switch 1's case, it'll be pretty easy, similar to what they did with Skyward Sword, except this will be even easier because they do not need to account for the controls since they already did that for the HD game. They also don't need to bring it up to HD because it's already been done in the HD Twilight Princess. So it'll be much simpler than Skyward Sword. Naturally, it's Nintendo, it's a Zelda game, it's a popular game, and a port that many people wanted on the Switch 1 from the very beginning. So they'll bring it to the Switch 1 at $60. But of course, they want to feed the people on the Switch too, right? So they gotta optimize it a little bit, up-res it a little bit more, bring it up to 4K, give or take on the 120 FPS, throw a little bit of nice lighting in there, and release it as a Nintendo Switch 2 edition title. But not just a simple visual upgrade, they'll include some skins, they'll include some bonus packs, miscellaneous little trinkets to make it feel like there is more benefit in buying the Switch 2 version than the Switch 1, even though it doesn't really take that much time or effort for them to add it. Basically, it is worth a $20 upgrade pack. So what this all amounts to is that you have a GameCube game that launched with the Wii. Because remember, Twilight Princess was originally made for the GameCube. It was sold on the Wii for $50. When it came out, nearing the end of the Wii U's life cycle, it was sold once again for $50 digitally, but if you bought it physically, it came with an amiibo, so it was $60. This was almost a decade after the Wii version was released, bearing in mind that Nintendo themselves were selling Twilight Princess on the Wii at the end of its life cycle for $20. And then, if they bring it over to the Nintendo Switch 2, roughly 20 years after its initial release on the Wii, you could very likely be in a position where you end up spending $80 on a GameCube game. Because again, the Switch 1 version is the one that will come for $60. So at minimum, if they didn't add anything except for making it look a little bit prettier for the Switch 2, you'll be paying $70 for Twilight Princess, a 20-year-old title, which for many may seem fine. It's a game from their childhood, and they're willing to fork up the cash in order to enjoy it again. But what happens is you end up with yet another console generation where the Nintendo flagship device is nothing more than a remake and a remaster and a re-release machine. Nothing more than a lineup of upgrade packs, DLCs that they're going to treat as they are primary flagship experiences. I have never been so pessimistic about the future of a Nintendo console as I am at this moment, because they are going to want it to last at least as long as the Switch 1 did. And in order to do that, they're going to have to stretch it out even more than they did on the Switch 1. And the way I see it is with these Nintendo Switch 2 Edition upgrade packs, they found how they are going to stretch it out. How they are going to keep you subscribed to the Nintendo Switch Online. How they are going to weaponize your nostalgia against you to keep you excited and clicking and in anticipation of the next 4K upgrade. And that's not even to account for the continuing of the drip feeding for the classics. Right now, if you look back on the life of the Nintendo Switch, if you bought a Nintendo Switch 1 right now, you would see a console worth buying with a lineup worth investing in, for the most part. But it took years to get there, and many of those years were slow and grueling. The Switch 2 is going to be slower. It's going to be way slower. By the end of the Switch 2's life cycle, we could be looking at a phenomenal console that includes DS games even in their classics lineup, and as many first titles as we saw in the Switch 1, including all of the re-releases. But just like they dragged it on with the Virtual Console, and they dragged it on with the 3DS, and they dragged it on with the drip feeding of both the first-party new titles as well as all of the classics throughout the Switch's life cycle, they're going to drag it on exponentially more during the Switch 2's life. And they're going to make even more money than they did in the previous generation if they can pull this off. And still, when the Switch 3 comes out and they increase all of the prices, people will say that Nintendo needs to cover their costs, and therefore, all of the increases in price are justified. Thanks again for listening. I will catch you on the next one.